early hours of August 21st, 1968, Czechoslovak radio interrupted its programming to read a statement from the country's own leadership. Troops of the Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Hungary, and Bulgaria were crossing the border at that moment, without the knowledge of the president, the premier, or the parliament. And the government was asking its citizens not to fight them. The army had been ordered to stay in its barracks. By sunrise, there were Soviet tanks parked in the center of Prague, and outside the radio building on Vinohradska Street, people were dying to protect a transmitter. 17 of them before it was over, unarmed, blocking the street with overturned buses, while the announcers inside kept repeating the same instructions. Stay calm, do not resist, we are with you. Then the main transmitters went quiet, one by one. The invasion took a single night. The punishment took 20 years, and it fell hardest on the people whose only weapon had been saying what they thought out loud. The man Moscow sent tanks to remove had been raised in the Soviet Union. Alexander Dubcek was a Slovak, the son of a founding member of the Czechoslovak Communist Party, and he spent his childhood in a workers' cooperative in Soviet Kyrgyzia, where his parents had moved to help build socialism. He came home a believer, and he stayed one. When the party's Central Committee elected him first secretary on January 5, 1968, nobody in Moscow objected, because nobody in Moscow thought the quiet, smiling Slovak was a risk. What Dubcek believed was that socialism did not require fear to function, and he began removing the fear to see what would happen. In March of 1968, the censors simply stopped censoring, and in June, the National Assembly abolished censorship outright. No other country in the bloc had ever gone that far. The program called it Socialism with a Human Face. Newspapers doubled their print runs and still sold out by breakfast. Television aired live debates where ministers were asked real questions and had to answer them. The political prisoners of the 50s, the ones who had survived the uranium mines, came out of the silence and began asking who had sent them there. In June, the writer Ludwig Vaculik published a manifesto called 2,000 Words, signed first by scientists and Olympic athletes, then by over 100,000 ordinary citizens, urging people to defend the reforms. Moscow called it counter-revolution. Brezhnev and the whole Soviet leadership rolled into a railway town on the Czechoslovak border and lectured him for 4 days. And Dubcek promised loyalty to the Warsaw Pact, came home, and changed almost nothing. Because the thing Moscow wanted stopped, a country thinking out loud, was the one thing he would not stop. The invitation came from inside the house. 5 hardliners in the Czechoslovak leadership, Vasil Bilak and Alois Indra among them, signed a secret letter to Brezhnev, asking him to intervene, as they put it, with all means at your disposal. Its existence was denied for 24 years, until the Russian archives opened and Boris Yeltsin handed a copy to the Czechoslovak president. The answer to it came on the night of August 20th, 1968. Around 11 that evening, 250,000 Warsaw Pact soldiers and some 2,000 tanks crossed the borders from 3 directions, in the largest military operation Europe had seen since the Second World War, and the force would eventually double. Soviet transport planes landed at Prague's airport through the night. The party presidium was in session as it happened, and voted 7-4 to condemn the invasion, the proclamation the radio read out before dawn. 3 of the 4 votes against came from men who had signed the invitation. Prague woke up occupied, People argued with the tank crews in Russian, and some of the young soldiers, told they were rescuing Czechoslovakia from a Western coup, seemed confused about where it was. Road crews unbolted street signs and repainted the ones they left, so that every signpost out of every village pointed the same direction: Moscow, 2,000 kilometers. None of it stopped anything. By the end of the year, 137 Czechoslovak civilians were dead and around 500 badly wounded. That first morning, paratroopers and Czechoslovak secret police walked into Dubcek's office, ripped the phones from the wall, and arrested him at his desk. He and 5 colleagues were held at gunpoint and flown east. They were held for days and then negotiated with, if that is the word when one side has abducted the other. In the Kremlin, the captured leaders, exhausted, isolated, and, in Dubcek's case, sedated, were pressed to sign a document called the Moscow Protocol. It legalized what had just been done to them. Soviet troops would remain on Czechoslovak soil, temporarily, a word doing heavy work. Censorship would return. The reforms would be rolled back by the reformers themselves, which was the elegant part, because it meant the occupation would carry Czechoslovak signatures. President Ludvík Svoboda flew in and urged them all to sign to prevent a bloodbath at home. 26 Czechoslovak officials were put in front of the protocol, and 25 of them signed. The 26th was František Kriegel, a 60-year-old physician who had spent the Spanish Civil War operating on wounded soldiers, and the Second World War doing the same in China. He read the protocol and refused. He told the delegation they could send him to Siberia or shoot him, but he would not put his name to the occupation of his own country. The Soviets planned to simply keep him and released him onto the plane home only after the delegation made it plain it would not fly without him. On August 27th, Dubcek went on the radio to tell the country what had been signed. The recording is famous for its pauses, long, swallowed silences where the leader of the ruling party stopped to keep from breaking down. People stood in the streets and wept with him, and then they went back to work. Days after the invasion, the country's most popular singer, Marta Kubishova, recorded A Prayer for Marta, built around a 300-year-old line from the exiled scholar Comenius. May the governance of your affairs return to your hands, O people. The radio played it all autumn until it was no longer allowed to. The reforms were not repealed in a day. They were sliced away one at a time through the autumn, each slice small enough that resisting it seemed hysterical, until by January, the country understood that the spring was not coming back. On January 16, 1969, a 20-year-old history student at Charles University named Jan Palach walked to the top of Wenceslas Square by the National Museum, poured petrol over himself, and struck a match. He ran burning down the square and collapsed. In his briefcase was a letter signed Torch Number 1, demanding an end to censorship and warning that more torches would follow if the demands were not met. He had chosen the method, he wrote, because the nation was on the edge of hopelessness and needed to be shaken awake. He survived for 3 days with burns over most of his body and died on the 19th of January. Investigators never found the organized group his letter described. It did not matter. A month later, an 18-year-old student named Jan Zajik burned himself to death in a passage off the same square. And in April, a factory worker named Evzen Ploček did the same in the town of Yelava. A crowd estimated as high as 200,000 followed Polak's coffin through Prague in silence. The regime absorbed it. In late March 1969, Czechoslovak hockey wins over the Soviet team set off street celebrations that ended with a wrecked Soviet airline office. A wrecking many still believe was staged by the secret police, and Moscow had its pretext. In April, Dubcek was removed. His replacement, Gustav Husak, presided over the era whose official name came from the Moscow Protocol itself: normalization. Freedom had lasted, depending on how you count, about 8 months. On the first anniversary of the invasion, in August 1969, tens of thousands went into the streets again. This time, no Soviet soldiers were needed. Czechoslovak riot police, the army, and the party's own workers' militia broke the demonstrations, leaving 5 dead and some 2,500 under arrest. The next day, the Parliament's Presidium issued an emergency legal measure expanding police powers, remembered ever since as the Baton Law. One of the signatures on it was Alexander Dubcek's, the Parliament chairman, made to sign the legal instrument of his own movement's burial. Then came the quiet part. Beginning in 1970, every one of the party's roughly 1.5 million members was called before a screening commission and asked, above all, one question: do you agree that the arrival of the armies was fraternal assistance? Answer honestly, and it was over. The party card, then the job, then the university places of your children, because the file followed the family. Roughly 500,000 members were expelled, struck off, or pushed to quit. The firings cascaded through newsrooms, faculties, studios, and courts, and some 300,000 people left the country for good. This is how Czechoslovakia became the country where philosophers stoked boilers and historians washed shop windows. Eugene Dienstbier, one of the radio's best-known reporters in 1968, spent years shoveling coal into a furnace. Milan Kundera was fired from the Film Academy, and his books disappeared from every public library in the country. Marta Kubisova was banned outright on the strength of pornographic photomontages the secret police had forged. And the most popular singer in the country spent the next 20 years gluing bags, assembling toys, and clerking in a construction office. Dubcek was posted to Turkey as ambassador, in the hope he would defect. When he did not, he was recalled, expelled from the party, and buried in a clerk's job at the Forestry Administration in Bratislava, tailed by secret police for 19 years. In 1973, the regime exhumed Jan Palach's body from his grave at night, cremated it, and handed the ashes to his mother, because the grave had become a shrine. Even the dead were screened. What was left to the band was the typewriter. Forbidden books circulated as carbon copies, retyped a dozen at a time and passed from reader to reader like contraband. A fired playwright named Václav Havel, whose work was staged in New York while being unperformable in Prague, took a job rolling barrels in a provincial brewery and got a play out of that too. In January 1977, Havel and over 200 others signed a document called Charter 77. It was almost aggressively mild. It demanded no change of government, only that Czechoslovakia obey the human rights agreements it had already signed. The regime reacted as if to an armed uprising. Signatories were fired, followed, and jailed, and the state organized rallies of performers to denounce a document none of them had been allowed to read. Franciszek Kriegel, the man who would not sign in Moscow, signed the charter. Its oldest spokesman was Jan Patočka, a 69-year-old philosopher barred from teaching for most of his life, who wrote that there are things worth suffering for. 2 months after the charter appeared, after one more round of day-long secret police interrogations, Patočka died in a Prague hospital. Havel kept writing. In 1978, he described the system as a structure of ritual lies, held up by every greengrocer who hangs a slogan he does not believe in his shop window, and vulnerable, therefore, to the one thing it could not metabolize: a person living as if the truth were true. A year later, the regime tried him, alongside other members of a committee he had co-founded to defend the unjustly prosecuted, and sentenced him to 4.5 years. He came out with pneumonia and more plays. The gray years ran on, and the screened stayed screened, right up until the week it all fell. On November 17th, 1989, riot police clubbed a student march on Narodny Street, and this time, the country did not absorb it. Within 3 days, there were 200,000 people in Wenceslas Square. On the 21st, from a newspaper balcony above the square, Marta Kubishova sang a prayer for Marta, unaccompanied, for the first time in public in nearly 20 years. The crowd below had been children when she was banned, and they knew every word. 3 days later, Alexander Dubcek, 67 now, stepped onto the same balcony beside Havel, and the square chanted his name. The party leadership resigned that evening. On December 28th, the forestry clerk was elected chairman of the Federal Assembly. The next day, the same parliament, still a communist parliament, voted unanimously to make the brewery worker president of the republic. The stoker became foreign minister. And on New Year's Day, the new president reached for the sentence the whole country knew from a banned song, the old line from Comenius: "People, your government has returned to you." The last Soviet soldier of the temporary stationing left in June 1991, 22 years and 10 months after the tanks arrived. Pollock's ashes came back to his grave in 1990. Dubcek lived to see all of it. He died in late 1992 of injuries from a car crash. The official history called August 21st Fraternal Assistance. The country always called it occupation, and the country turned out to have the longer memory. Every year on this night, there are candles on Vinohradska Street, outside the radio building, where a voice on the air once asked a nation to stay calm. And 17 people stood in front of the tanks anyway.